They handed me a citation I never asked for, right? As I was folding chairs for a ceremony I wasn't invited to. Name's Callie Jensen, 32 Civilian Security Tarmac Detail, Fort Glades. The coffee was cold, the Georgia sun too bright, and the chipped coin from my old unit weighed heavier than usual in my back pocket. Ever been praised for something no one knew you did? Until the one person who mattered finally remembered most people at Dover AFB don't look twice at the quiet woman guarding the tarmac gate, but she remembers every face that passes her by. June 28, 2023. Early morning light barely spilled over the razor wire fencing at Dover Air Force Base. The dry summer air buzzed faintly with the distant hum of C-17 engines. Rows of American flags rippled in the breeze, and tents were going up across the lawn in preparation for Independence Day. At the South Perimeter Gate, the one nobody paid much attention to, Maggie Chen, had already been standing watch for over an hour. She reached out as she did every morning and let her fingers brush the bronze plaque near the fence post. Freedom requires vigilance. The words were faded, but her touch was steady, part ritual, part reminder. Behind dark sunglasses, Maggie's eyes tracked the trickle of personnel entering the flight line. An aircraft technician gave her a quick wink, then moved on without slowing. A pair of junior airmen wheeled a crate of supplies past her without a glance. Most of them saw her the way people see a fire extinguisher there, in case of emergency, otherwise invisible. "Look sharp, Gate Queen," a voice called with a lazy edge. Sergeant Riley Knox strolled up, his uniform unzipped halfway and his coffee sloshing in a chipped mug. He gave her a quick smirk. "Long day ahead, babysitting this fence." "Good morning, Sergeant," Maggie replied, voice flat, eyes still scanning. He snorted. "You civilians and your formality," he said loud enough for a nearby airman to hear. Then he walked off, chuckling at his own joke. Maggie didn't respond. She rarely did. A white supply truck rumbled into view on a camera feed headed the wrong way, turning onto a runway under temporary closure. Maggie keyed her radio calmly. "Charlie Post to Logistics Dispatch. Your delivery vehicle's about to enter runway 22R. Recommend redirect via Delta route immediately. Static." "Then copy that, Charlie." Damn good eyes. No name. No thanks. Just Charlie. Back in the break room, the air was thick with instant coffee and vinyl upholstery. Airman Wyatt sat awkwardly near her, balancing a jelly donut on a napkin. He looked barely old enough to shave. "So, you been doing this long?" he asked, trying not to stare. "I mean, you look like you used to be more than just... You know this." Maggie took a slow sip of her black coffee. "That depends on who's asking." Wyatt blinked, unsure if that was a joke. He laughed anyway. On the counter beside the microwave, someone had left a printout of VIP arrivals. Her gaze drifted to the highlighted name. General Retinue Douglas Harmon. Something behind her expression shifted just a flicker before it settled back into place. By mid-afternoon, the sun had baked the asphalt. Volunteers struggled with tent poles as patriotic banners fluttered overhead. A few elderly veterans shuffled past her gate, eyeing the tarmac with detached nostalgia. Maggie nodded at each of them as they passed. None nodded back. In the admin office, Captain Ford slapped a folder down on his desk. "Ms. Chen, I need an explanation. Why did you interfere with the delivery route this morning?" "There was a blocked runway, sir. The vehicle was heading directly toward it. I advised rerouting per base safety protocol." "You're not logistics. You don't advise anything," Ford snapped. "You open the gate. That's it." She said nothing, just held his stare until he turned back to his screen. Next time, stay in your lane. The room was silent, but for the soft hum of the wall fan. Later that evening, as darkness gathered over the tarmac, Maggie stood alone again. Her ID badge edges, frayed from years of use, hung just below her collar. The polish on her boots caught the amber glow of the security floodlights. From her booth, she stared out toward the inactive runway. Douglas Harmon. She murmured the name, tasting strange in her mouth. Been a long time since I heard that one. In a quiet corner of her garage, Maggie opens a metal box marked Dover Kandahar Echo Echo. The jazz was soft, barely audible, drifting from the kitchen radio, like a memory trying not to be remembered. Maggie stood barefoot on the cool tile floor of her small duplex, staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop. The draft email was still open. Subject: resignation request. Civilian contractor clearance from Chen Margaret. Gate ops to DAFB personnel office. I respectfully submit my... She sighed and closed the screen. Outside porch lights hummed in the warm Delaware night. A stray tabby she'd nicknamed Sergeant Whiskers padded up the steps, tail flicking. Maggie stepped out and knelt with a dish of tuna. The cat sniffed it suspiciously, then began to eat, letting her scratch behind one ear. "You're braver than the guys inside that fence," she murmured. Back indoors, Maggie moved to the garage. The air there was dry and faintly metallic. In the far corner, behind boxes of spare linens and an unused bicycle, sat a dented olive-drab file box. Faded stenciling read, "Dover, Kandahar, Echo, Echo." She opened it slowly. Inside were military-issue folders, service coins, a pair of desert-tan gloves, and a logistics medal still in its presentation case. The bronze shone dully beneath the garage light. At the bottom, wrapped in a cloth map, was a letter. She unfolded it. At the top, recommendation for commendation, Lieutenant Margaret Chen. Paragraphs of technical praise signatures from base officers in Kandahar. At the bottom, a blank line where Commanding General was meant to sign. It remained unsigned. She held the paper loosely as if the weight of it had changed. A light blinked on her phone. Voicemail. "Hey, it's Jenna. You might not remember me, but we met a few times at the Rusty Mug. My granddad's visiting the base for the 4th General Harmon Douglas. I'd really like you to meet him. Or reconnect, I don't know." Call Me Maggie stared at the phone like it had spoken in code. Harmon. It wasn't just a name. It was a corner of her memory she'd nailed shut long ago. She leaned back in her chair and let herself slip into the past. Kandahar Airfield, spring 2011. Dust stung her eyes as Lieutenant Chen argued with General Harmon in the field tent. Flash flooding had severed key supply routes. Harmon, seated with hands folded, barely looked up from his dispatches. "Respectfully, sir, the assets we need are being misrouted," she said. "If we pre-position supplies here—" "I've read your theory," Harmon interrupted. "You're clever, Lieutenant. But clever doesn't always equal right. With all due respect, I've commanded longer than you've been alive, Chen," he snapped. "We don't improvise logistics just because it looks smart on paper." She'd stood rigid as he waved her off. That night, she rerouted the convoy anyway, without orders. Within 36 hours, 2 battalions were resupplied by airdrop from her improvised route. No casualties, no lost equipment. It had worked. The letter she found in the garage was her reward, typed acknowledged, unsigned. Maggie blinked. Back in her garage, the jazz had ended. Silence now filled the room, heavier than the memory. She flipped open her laptop again, cursor blinking where she'd left off. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then slowly she hit backspace. All of it. Deleted. From the corkboard near the door, she pulled a pushpin and stuck her logistics medal up next to her keys. She wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Her phone buzzed again. A second voicemail from Jenna. Hey, me again. He probably won't recognize you, but you changed how I see service. I thought you should know. Maggie closed her eyes. No reply formed, but something loosened in her chest. Not warm exactly. Not bitter either. She looked once more at the stenciled box. Echo Echo. The nickname they gave her unit. Still meant something. Outside, Sergeant Whiskers meowed. Inside, Maggie touched the metal just once before turning out the light.
Chansu.
Cliffhanger. Maggie pins her old bronze logistics medal to the corkboard beside her keys. A black SUV pulls into Dover's main gate. The man inside hasn't worn a uniform in 10 years, but people still stand when he passes. The first thing to reach the airbase wasn't the SUV, it was the music. The marching band was rehearsing on the east field, brass and snare drums tumbling across the wind. Sunlight bounced off polished railings and the bronze statue of fallen soldiers near the main plaza. Officers tightened their collars, staff sergeants snapped to attention, and someone barked a warning into the radio, retired General Harmon incoming. Repeat, full honors. When the vehicle pulled up outside the officers' lounge, it didn't need flags or escort bikes. Just the sound of the heavy door swinging open was enough. General Douglas Harmon emerged slowly. His spine was straighter than expected for a man with a cane. The leather grip of it clicked once against the curb. Even out of uniform in a crisp white dress shirt and navy slacks, he looked like someone who could issue orders no one dared question. Nearby, Captain Ford adjusted his collar, eyes wide. Good to see you again, sir. We've arranged your quarters near the viewing platform. Jenna will escort you there. Harmon didn't respond immediately. He turned his head, taking in the base like a man reading a familiar book with pages missing. His gaze swept across the tarmac over hangars, then rested briefly on the distant security post, the south checkpoint. Still smells the same, he murmured. His voice was deep but slow-shaped by age, not weakened by it. At that checkpoint, Maggie stood unmoving, eyes behind her sunglasses, as the SUV shrank to a dot in the side mirror. She'd known he would come in through the main gate, of course. That's how people like him always came, with announcements, with watchers, with polished brass and eager eyes. She remained still anyway. 10 minutes later, she heard boots on gravel. Hi, Jenna, Harmon said brightly, stepping up to the fence line. You probably don't remember me. I was barely a teenager last time you came into the Rusty Mug. You used to get toast and cinnamon, I think. Maggie let a small, almost smile lift the corner of her mouth. Still do, he's here, Jenna added, voice dropping a little. I mean, my grandfather. I don't know if he'll... She trailed off, unsure whether to say, recognize, remember, or acknowledge. Maggie rescued her with a quiet, "It's all right." Jenna stepped aside as Harmon approached, slower now. Maggie held a salute. The general's eyes narrowed as he studied her. You look oddly familiar. I get that a lot, sir, she said, dropping her hand. He studied her a moment longer. Head tilted slightly, not enough to seem rude, just curious. Then nodded once and turned away. Not 5 steps later, Sergeant Knox leaned against the nearby wall, arms crossed. Civvy thinks she's still one of us, he muttered, not low enough. Harmon paused mid-stride. He turned slightly, not speaking, but the look he gave Knox was colder than anything Maggie had said all week. Knox pretended to check his clipboard, suddenly very busy. Jenna blinked. She'd caught it too, that subtle shift in the general's posture. Something had registered. The rest of the day moved in coordinated rhythm. Harmon met with command staff, toured the parade ground, inspected the Wall of Honor. Jenna walked beside him like an anchor. But now and then he glanced back toward the south gate, toward the woman he couldn't quite place. Later, at the edge of the officer's wing, Harmon stepped out for air. The walkway was empty, save for the buzz of insects and the pop of distant fireworks tests. His cane tapped the pavement until the rubber tip snagged in a sidewalk crack. He lurched. Before anyone could speak, Maggie was there, her hand on his elbow, steady, firm, but not forceful. Her grip was precise, familiar. He didn't pull away. They stood that way for half a second too long. Then he righted himself, nodding stiffly. "Thank you," he said. Not out of courtesy, it sounded more like surprise. She offered no words, just a slight nod. Back in his room, Harmon sat slowly rubbing his elbow. "That woman," he said to Jenna after a long pause. "What did you say her name was again?" Jenna looked up from the visitor log. "Chen. Corporal Maggie Chen." Cliffhanger. Harmon to Jenna. "That woman, what did you say her name was? Again, Jenna Chen. Corporal Maggie Chen." General Harmon stops mid-rehearsal and asks calmly, "Where can I find Corporal Chen?" The room fell silent. The band rehearsal on the lawn outside had paused for a water break. Brass instruments rested against benches and flags swayed under the mid-morning sun. Inside the Veterans Circle meeting room, a wood-paneled hall ringed by flags from 6 wars ceiling fans creaked slowly overhead, stirring air heavy with memory. Jenna looked up from the sign-in table. "I think she's on the Tarmac path, sir." General Harmon nodded once, then leaned into his cane. It was carved walnut, polished from decades of use, a gift from his wife the year he retired. He tapped it once against the floor, then moved with slow but deliberate steps toward the side exit. Outside, under the drone of cicadas and the distant rumble of jets, Maggie Chen stood near the path, leading along the southern perimeter. She wore her standard base-issue polo ID badge tucked into her front pocket, and the same mirror-polished boots. Her eyes met his as he approached, and she nodded before he could speak. "You asked for me, sir," she said, voice steady. Harmon regarded her for a moment, as if reading a classified file written across her face. "Walk with me, Corporal." They started along the path in silence, their footsteps measured the space between them, charged, but respectful. Jenna followed at a distance, not interfering, just watching, curious and quiet. After a dozen paces, Harmon asked, "What's Field Load Delta Bravo?" Maggie answered without hesitation. "Forward deployed modular cargo structure, designed to sustain platoon-level units for 96 hours without resupply. Implemented under Ops Silo Phase 2, 2010. He grunted, still sharp. "I try." They passed a small stand of hedges and came into view of a brass plaque bolted into a stone pedestal. The metal was weather-worn, but still legible. It bore a list of names: logistics officers, sergeants, and civilian contractors, those who had distinguished themselves in battlefield supply work. One of the names, Maggie noted, belonged to a captain who had been trapped during the Kandahar flood, saved by a last-minute route diversion. Her route. Harmon slowed. "That flood," he said quietly. "Kandahar. 2011. Maggie's hand flexed once at her side. "You stayed behind when others ran." He wasn't looking at the plaque anymore. He was looking at her. Maggie gave a faint nod, almost imperceptible. I acted under what I had. No one else was in position to coordinate reroutes. I remember the operation logs now. Harmon said, voice no longer the bark of command, but the cadence of confession. We lost the runway, but saved the gear, and the people. He paused. You were theory to me, overconfident, eager. He turned toward her, fully letting his cane rest against the edge of the plaque base. But you weren't theory. You were instinct and execution. You acted while I hesitated. The wind rustled the flag near the entrance. Somewhere behind them, a pair of veterans in folding chairs watched, but said nothing. One of them, an old Navy chief, lifted a styrofoam cup and offered it toward Maggie as they passed again. Coffee, ma'am, he asked. Maggie blinked, then accepted. Thanks, Chief. Harmon took a folded paper from his breast pocket, aged creased but intact. The document was familiar even before she saw the header. After Action Report, Flood Response Ops, Kandahar, April 2011. He held it with both hands. It's time I gave credit where it's due. His signature was scrawled in bold blue ink at the bottom, added not 10 years ago, but 2 days prior. Fresh, final. Maggie looked down at it for a long moment. The silence was no longer heavy, just full. Behind them, Jenna pressed a hand to her heart. Not dramatic, just present. Maggie didn't smile, but she met Harmon's eyes and nodded. Cliffhanger. He removes a folded copy of the 2011 after-action report signed in his own handwriting. He adds, it's time I gave credit where it's due. The July 4th program draft leaks, and a name appears that no one expected under Special Recognition, Logistics, and Service. By mid-afternoon on July 3rd, the base felt like a town preparing for a festival. Strings of red, white, and blue bunting fluttered from rooftops. Folding chairs were set in symmetrical rows near the flag courtyard. Young airmen zipped back and forth with lists, radios, and duct tape. And somewhere between the print room and the admin office, someone dropped a stack of draft event programs face up. There, under the Special Recognition section, a name appeared beneath the bold header, Logistics and Service Lieutenant Retau. Margaret Chen word spread faster than the ink could dry. In the dining hall, whispers trailed down the chow line like static. 2 officers paused near the salad bar, rereading the program. I thought she was a contractor, one said. The other replied, apparently not. Just that. Sergeant Knox stood near the utensil rack, tray in hand, shoulders tense. When Maggie entered, quiet as ever, ID badge still clipped to her belt loop, the clatter of silverware didn't quite stop, but it softened. He stepped into her path. Hey, he said. His voice cracked. She looked at him, waiting. I've been a jackass. Back there. Before. Just didn't see it straight. Maggie didn't smile, didn't flinch. Just said, it's a long road. Knox looked down. She added, you're walking it, and moved past him. Jenna caught up with her near the corner booth. You saw it right? The program. Maggie shrugged. I hear I've been promoted. Jenna laughed. I memorized your citation in ROTC. Back when I thought logistics was just crates and clipboards, you made it sound like chess. That stopped Maggie mid-step. She turned, and for the first time in days, emotion cracked her composure. Not big, just enough. A flicker at the edge of her eyes. At the rusty mug, the air smelled of cinnamon fryer oil and fresh squeezed lemonade. Ms. Shelley had lined the dessert case with pies, cherry pecan, blueberry, all trimmed with little star-shaped cutouts on the crust. Maggie bought a slice of pecan and tipped in cash like always. But this time Shelley called out, See you tomorrow. Lieutenant and the whole counter seemed to pause. Back near Veterans Circle, folding chairs were set in rows under a tent. General Harmon stood at the front, flanked by flags of 6 different campaigns. His voice was quiet but carried the kind of tone you don't interrupt, not because it's loud, but because it knows. Echo, echo taught me how to see again, he said. A few of the older vets nodded. One tapped his cane softly on the ground. Harmon continued. I used to think service meant commands, uniforms, medals. But sometimes it means staying when you're told to leave. Acting when silence is safer. He paused. And sometimes it means saying someone's name. Aloud. That night in the officers' lounge, Harmon made a single call, not delegated, not filtered. Put it in writing, he told the base commander. She won't ask for it. So I am. Name her as she was, and still is. Lieutenant Chen. No fanfare, no speech, just correction. Back at the south gate, Maggie returned to her locker, a dented gray door same as any other. She twisted the combination dial, opened it slowly. Inside, folded and untouched, was her old Air Force service cap, the one she hadn't worn in over a decade. The insignia was slightly dulled. The lining still faintly smelled of jet fuel and heat. She set it beside her current badge on the locker shelf, then closed the door, not with finality, but readiness. Cliffhanger. Maggie opens her locker. Her old service cap, untouched for 10 years, is waiting. She places it beside her modern badge. They never added her name to the program, but when she walked into Trask's cafe the next morning, everyone stood up anyway. It wasn't loud. There was no trumpet, no voice from a podium, no formal applause. Just the scrape of chairs against tile, the soft clink of coffee mugs, and the hush of a community recognizing something someone finally seen. Callie Jensen stepped through the glass door of Trask's pie and coffee coat, zipped halfway scarf tucked loosely around her neck. Wind chimes jingled behind her, caught in the soft gust that carried in smells of cinnamon and brewed roast. The veterans by the window rose first, out of habit maybe. Then Ms. Trask looked up from her register and smiled. 2 teenagers near the counter followed suit, nudging each other, unsure why they stood, but sure it mattered. Even Rusty Miller, seated at the corner booth with his elbows on the laminate, straightened his spine and gave a small, respectful nod. Callie blinked, then gently removed her gloves. You didn't have to. We didn't, Ms. Trask said, coming around the counter. But we wanted to. Behind her, Bonnie was polishing a small wooden plaque, freshly bolted to the wall above the far booth. Reserved for the quiet ones in honor, in thanks. Bonnie looked up and tapped the cushion seat. It's yours. Cream's fresh. Pie's warm. Callie sat slowly. She didn't say much, but this time she didn't bring powdered packets. She stirred real cream into her coffee and watched it curl in soft swirls like morning fog drifting over still water. Outside the window, wind swept through the trees, spinning leaves in orange spirals. Across the street, kids were chasing each other between fair booths, going up for the holiday market, apple cider, paper snowflakes, strings of blinking lights. Rusty slid into the seat across from her and placed a sealed envelope on the table. He didn't push it toward her. Just set it there. You might want this, he said. It's from Peabody. Callie raised an eyebrow. There's a photo inside, too, Rusty added. From the ceremony. You didn't notice it being taken. Mid-step. You look right. She opened the flap slowly. A printed photo slid into her palm. Grainy, black and white. She was crossing the tarmac during the Veterans Day ceremony, eyes on the crowd, expression so unreadable but steady. A quiet sentinel in motion. No caption. She unfolded the note tucked behind it. I judged a guard by her station. I should have looked at her posture. Peabody Callie let out the barest sound, a huff of a laugh surprised by the honesty. Rusty sipped his coffee, watching her reaction. He means it. I know. Later that day, when the cafe crowd had thinned and Bonnie had flipped the open sign to back in 10, Callie walked the short path toward Fort Glades Memorial Park. The air was cooler now. The sky, pale with streaks of late autumn blue, held the sun low and soft. She stood before the granite wall, rows of names etched in clean lines. She traced one with her finger, A. Donnelly, pausing at the chipped edge of the D. From her coat pocket, she drew a small object, a button cracked, frayed around the thread holes. Torn from the inside seam of her jacket, the Day Alpha team was pinned during that 2010 mission. She knelt and placed it just beneath the nameplate. Not a medal, not official, but hers. A gust of wind stirred her collar as she stood. Leaves rustled behind her. Rusty joined her after a beat, walking slow, hands in pockets. Will you be working the tarmac again next year? He asked. Callie looked at him, then out at the field, where the parade ground had already been cleared. Only if it's needed, she said, then added with the faintest grin, but this time maybe I'll bring a chair. They walked on in silence, boots crunching over fallen leaves. Optional closing line narrator. Some people earn medals. Others earn the silence they leave behind. Sometimes the quietest gestures echo the longest. In a world quick to judge by rank or uniform, Callie reminded us that quiet courage and steady kindness don't need a stage, just a seat at the table. True service doesn't always wear a medal. Sometimes it's stitched into a worn button or poured into a second cup of coffee. If this story warmed something in you, pass that warmth along. Someone nearby might be waiting to be seen. After all, like a porch light on a windy night, even the gentlest kindness can guide someone home.